Good evening. We are learning Maseches Pesachim, and we are starting Daf Tes, and we are about 2/3 of the way down on Ches and Beis. Reflecting back on our Mishnah on Daf Beis, we learned there about the barrels. We saw then, if you just flip back to the beginning of the page or the beginning of the parak, it says, Uvame amru beis shuros b'martev. It says, and where did they say about the 2 rows of the martev? So this is actually where the Gemara picks up, because when you read this, the Gemara seems like we were already talking about it almost. Like, oh, Uvame amru beis shuros b'martev. Remember, we were talking about the 2 rows in the martev? So the Gemara is a little bothered by that. And that's where the Gemara opens at the 2 dots, 2/3 of the way down on Ches and Beis. Let's get started. Uvame amru beis shuros b'martev. Martev, Mandekar Shmei, you're talking about it like we've already spoken about it, but who mentioned it? Who was talking about it? Mandekar Shmei, who's even mentioned it? So it says, Hachi Kamar. And this Hachi Kamar really means, here's what our Mishnah should say. And we add in some language. What does our Mishnah add? Kol makom she'ein machnisim bo chametz ein tzarich bedika. Any place, and this we have in our Mishnah, this language we have, any place where you do not bring chametz to, there's no need to do bdikas chametz. Ve'otzros yain, ve'otzros shemen nami. And in regards to storage houses of wine and storage houses of oil, those as well, ein tzarich bedika. All right, we learned yesterday about the distinctions about whether or not you're mistapik from them. Uvame amru, this is what our Mishnah should say. Uvame amru shtei shuros b'martev. And in what case do we say you have to check the shtei shuros b'martev? Our Mishnah really is missing information. It should have been within our Mishnah itself, the Mishnah that we're so familiar with. Many of us have learned this Mishnah many times. There's missing text from it. And that's why when we reflect back on this Mishnah, we need to be able to say, hey, we learned the Gemara on Ches and Beis. It adds in the Gemara, that adds language into the Mishnah in order to give some greater context, because Martef, Mandekar Shmei, no one was talking about it yet. The Mishnah refers to it as though we were in the middle of a conversation. So this is the added language. In the Mishnah, we saw that there was a machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. The language in our Mishnah was that Beis Shammai says it's shtei shuros al pnei kol hamartev, that there's 2 rows on the whole front of the cellar, and Beis Hillel said shtei shuros al chitzon she'eino elyonos, and Hillel said that it's the 2 rows that are chitzon she'ein elyon, the 2 that are upper and outer. Now there's a machlokes, a double machlokes. First, there's a machlokes about what Beis Shammai means, 2 shitas. And then there's a machlokes about what Beis Hillel means. So we're going to get into all 4 of those shitas right now. We are at the 2 dots. Where are we? Approximately 12 lines up or so, give or take. Beis Shammai omrim shtei shuros. Ches and Beis. What did I say? I didn't say. Okay, we're about 10 lines up from the bottom, 12 lines up from the bottom. Ches and Beis. Beis Shammai omrim shtei shuros. What did Beis Shammai mean? Machlokes hamoraim. Amar Rabbi Yehuda shtei shuros she'amru min haaretz ve'ad shmei korah. They are vertical columns that you have to check. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Shura Achas Kimin Gem. It's like the letter. It's like a letter from another language, and this letter has like an L shape to it. So the Mefarish on the side here, he writes it's like a Dalet Hafucha. So let's say that I'm looking at the front of barrels. Here it would be an L shape. 1 row that's going vertical and 1 row that's going horizontal. That would be how the Maseches Hashas explains this shita. Within Beis Shammai, that is the shita of Rabbi Yochanan. And there are brises to support each. Tanya Kavasid Rabbi Yehuda, Tanya Kavasid Rabbi Yochanan. Tanya Kavasid Rabbi Yehuda. What's the brisa that supports the shita of Rabbi Yehuda? Beis Shammai omrim shtei shuros al pnei kol hamartev. That's a quote from our Mishnah. It's in its own brisa. And how do we define it? Ushtei shuros she'amru min haaretz ve'ad shmei korah. A beautiful text proof to the shita that is first presented to support Beis Shammai. That's the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda. And Tanya Kavasid Rabbi Yochanan. What about Rabbi Yochanan, who says that it's Kimin Gem? It's like a letter that it's like the letter that looks like an inverted Dalet. Shtei shuros al pnei kol hamartev chitzona roa es haPesach ve'elyona roa sakora. One faces the doorway and one faces the beams. Shelifnim heimena v'shelamatem and ein tzarich bedika. And below and behind and within the depth of the many layers of barrels. Ein tzarich bedika. That's all shitas Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel omrim, and of course we paskin like Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel omrim shtei shuros hachitzon she'ein elyonos. How do we understand this here too? Machlokes Rab and Shmuel. Amar Rab elyona v'shelamata himena. So if there's like, let's say 5 rows, it's the top row that you see and the row right beneath it. So the top, you see the top 2 rows, but the ones that are on the outer wall facing, but that's where the 2 are. That's the sheet of Rab. Shmuel Amar Elyona v'shelifnim himena. He says, no, it's the top row that you see and the one just behind it that you don't see. So that's the machlokes. Everyone agrees that the top outer row within Beis Hillel, the top row that you can see, that's the one. So Beis Hillel, according to one version, is two, the two that you see, and the other is the one that you see with the one behind, so one deep. So that's machlokes Beis Shammai. That's machlokes within Beis Hillel between Rav and Shmuel. My time of the Rav. Why does Rav say that it's Elyon v'shelamata himeno, that it's the two top ones that you see? Die chitzonos. He looked at the word in our mission. It said chitzonos. It said the outer ones. Hold on one second. It also says the word elyonos, which is obviously what was driving Shmuel. So he says, no, lemuute tatoi de tataisa. The very low ones that are all the way down at the bottom. Just to teach you that it's elyonos. You don't have to worry about the ones at the bottom. Only the top two rows. Shmuel Amar Elyon v'shelifnim hemena. Shmuel argued with Rav within Beis Hillel and says, no, it's the top row and the one that's one layer deep, but all top row. So he says, my timer, what was the reason why Shmuel held the way he did? Because Diek Elyonos, he looked at the word Elyonos, and Elyonos is the two top ones. So it's the two rows from the front at the top row front, and top row second. So that's what he says were the two. But the Mishnah also says chitzonos. It says the outer ones as well. So why didn't you say like the other shita? Why did you say it this way? Because to let you know that the ones that are very much inside, the deep ones, those you don't need to do. So just playing with the language. This is machlokes Rav and Shmuel, and we need to know how we paskin. Rav Chia Tani Kavase de Rav. Rav Chia was of the opinion that Rav was right. V'chulu Tanoe, all the other Tanoim, Tanu Kavase de Shmuel, v'hilchasa Kavase de Shmuel. And we paskin like Shmuel. So therefore, what did Shmuel hold? Shmuel said that what Beis Hillel held in the Mishnah is, let's say I had a stack of 5 tall by 5 deep. So then what Shmuel holds, that Beis Shammai holds, is that it's the top row that you can see and the row just behind it. Those are the two rows that require b'dikas chametz. Good. That brings us to a new Mishnah. We just finished our Mishnah, Baruch Hashem. It took us 7-8 blot, and I hope we have some clarity on it. If you look back at the Mishnah now, we've learned a lot of sugyas that are just connected to these words. Or la'arbasar, we spoke about yesterday, or haner. We spoke about what is included when we say kol makom la'asuya, kol makom she'machnisim bo. We just added in language into our Mishnah to make sure that martef makes sense. We just explained 2 shitas in Beis Shammai. We just explained 2 shitas in Beis Hillel, and we said that the one that we passed like in Beis Hillel is Shmuel. Beautiful. New Mishnah. There are some printout copies of the Shulchan Aruch. We're going to get to that toward the end of the day, and we can hand them out before then. Opens the new Mishnah on the top of Daf Tes Amud Aleph. Mishnah writes as follows. If there are some mice, we don't have to worry so much that a mouse would take food from one house to another house or from one place to another place. Because if your brain starts going there out of concern, then I mean, come on, there's mice everywhere. We live in Chicago. There's rats all over the place. So you're going to say that I did b'dikas chametz and maybe there's a rat. If you say maybe there's a rat, that argument never ends. And that's why the Mishnah says it's a crazy lumdus. If we're concerned about chametz, who cares about ein l'davar sof? That's not a good argument. If there's chametz, then you should be concerned. So we're going to be debating today within the Gemara different shitas about how to understand the scope of responsibility out of concern for animals. And the Gemara opens up with our inference, and this inference is going to be the bedrock of some of our conversation today. It says the Gemara, Taima, what's the reason why in our Mishnah you don't have to do b'dika? Because the lochazina de shakal, we didn't see a rodent take food, but hachazina de shakal. What if in fact I saw a rat in my house take food? Good. So then, chayshinan ubay b'dika. The diuk from our Gemara is that maybe the only reason why our Mishnah says that you're not obligated to do b'dika is because you didn't see the animal take anything. But if you see an animal take something, then pashut, you should be concerned. That's the diuk of the Gemara. Says the Gemara, ve'amai. Why would you say that we should be concerned even if you see the animal? Nema achalte. Why don't we just assume that the animal eats it? You ever go in your garbage cans and see that the squirrels have torn open our bags that are smell-proof and flavored? And of course, they eat right through them. No problem at all. They're rodents, right? So why wouldn't we just assume that they ate everything? Says the Gemara, as a text proof to this, Milotnan, we have another Mishnah elsewhere. This is a Mishnah in Ahalos. And this Mishnah in Ahalos is going to conflict, at least at first, is going to conflict with our Mishnah. How does it conflict with our Mishnah? Because it says Gemara 7 lines down, Meduros ha'akum, the places where akum live, where non-Jews live, not the non-Jews of today, it's a whole different culture as we will soon see, Tmeim. Those places are Tamei. Rashi, Dibur hamaschil, just to our right, Dibur hamaschil, Meduros ha'ovdei kochavim Tmeim. Why? Bibnei, this is very abnormal, shekovren niflehim bevatehim, because they actually bury stillborn, they bury miscarriage babies in their homes, in the floors. Of course, their homes were made of dirt floors. That's where everybody's at the time. And they didn't have a proper burial for the child. They would bury this child. They buried the stillborn in the house. So it says, going back in the Gemara, this is part of a Mishnah. The Mishnah continues. How long does it have to be that the goy has to live in this location for there to be a concern about whether or not they buried a stillborn in such a location? Arba'im yom. Why arba'im yom? Because we know that from conception until 40 days, even though it's painful, of course, for the family to lose a child, even at any point, of course, even before 40 days, but halachically speaking, that's not considered a stillborn. There would be no tuma, for example. It wouldn't be considered a leda, whereupon a woman would become tmeya, right? Let's say there was no dam, if there was such a theoretical concept that a person could lose a baby without seeing dam. She would not be a nida, right? As long as it's not enough dam to make her a nida, she would not be a nida. Because even though there was a stillborn, but it was prior to day 40. So that's where the number 40 comes from, is that after day 40, we're already talking about if there's a birth at that point, then she'd have to bring a korban like the Pesachim and Tazria we saw a few days ago, but up to day 40. Even if the person's not married, so there, what was that talking about? Because it's a promiscuous culture, lav dafka, that it had to be a monogamous relationship where he had a wife that was pregnant. It could have been that it was a woman that he was with, and she was mapelas, and they buried it here. Now, this Mishnah closes out, in that location, if animals had access, a chulda and a chazir, if these animals had access to this house, ein tzarich bedika, what does this show you? Animals eat food, what they consider food, right? So our Mishnah had an inference that if you see the animal, then you, what did it say? Our Mishnah said, if you see the animal, then we have to do bdikas chametz. And the Gemara said, hey, wait a minute. Why do you have to do bdikas chametz? Animals eat food. Look at the Mishnah in Oholos. We see that if there's a chulda and a chazir, that they eat food, nothing to worry about. Says the Gemara, Reb Zera answers, there's a difference between food, which is bread, and food, which is meat. How so? Animals don't leave over meat. Right, they're eating the Rahman al-San. They're eating the stillborn. So bebasar lo mishaira, they won't leave over any. But belecha and mishaira. But when it comes to bread, there's crumbs everywhere. It's not like they're going to pick up a whole loaf of bread and eat the whole thing. It's not like that. Rava says to Rav Zera, "What are you talking about?" And here we get into a lumdasha idea. The Gemara says, "Amar Rava, hi my. What are you even comparing? These two cases are not resembling each other at all. Why not? Because Bishlam Mahasam, I understand why in the case of the Akum, where they bury stillborns in there, I understand that case. I got it. Here's what's going on there. Hasam, Amor Hava, Amor Lo Hava. We're not even sure if there was a stillborn in the first place. It's all a chashash derabanan. We're not sure. Suffix number one. Hasam, Amor Hava, maybe there was a stillborn, Amor Lo Hava. V'im timtzulomar Hava, and if you want to say that really there was a stillborn, Amor Achalte, maybe we could say the animals ate it. We have two sveikos. That's what we call in halacha a svek sveika. It's a suffix upon which there's another suffix. Suffix number one is, was there ever a stillborn that was buried there? And even if worst case scenario, the answer is yes, suffix if the animals ate it. Fine. That's a svek sveika. But says Gemara, Aval Hacha, what's our Mishnah talking about? Divadai dechazina deshakal. We know that the animal was there. We saw the animal take the chametz. Mi yemar de'achalte. That's only one suffix. The only suffix was achila. We know that the animal was there. So maybe he took it into my house. So it says the Gemara, here's what we have. This is the Lamda Shalain, a very well-known Shas topic. Have a suffix vivadai, ve'ein suffix motzi midevadai. Our Mishnah is a case where when you look at the old school scale, on one side you have a vadai, I saw the animal take bread. And on the other side, I have a suffix of did he eat the bread or not? Ein suffix motzi midevadai, and therefore you should need bedika. But in the case of the akum with the stillborns, that's not suffix and vadai. That's not. That's a double suffix. It's not regular. It's suffix and suffix. There was no vadai in that case. So the case that the Gemara wanted to ask from is not eligible to be asked from. It's not suffix and vadai. Our Mishnah is ein suffix yotzi midei vadai. Ein suffix. The language just it's a suffix and vadai, and ein suffix motzi midei vadai. Our Mishnah is only a case of one suffix, but the case of the Meduras of the Goyim is two sveikos. Cases are not comparable. Says the Gemara, really? Ve'ein suffix motzi midei vadai. I can show you a bunch of rayas where we see that we see that a case of suffix can override a vadai. The Gemara is now going to ask two questions, each of which will have 2 answers, and then we will move forward. Halfway down Testament says the Gemara, Tanya, we have a brisa where we show that we break our Mishnah's rule. We have a brisa that shows that yes, the suffix can trump a vadai. Tanya chaver shemeis, if there's a chaver, as we've already learned in this Masechta, a chaver is a person who keeps halacha very carefully, and he passes away, unfortunately. And he has a basket filled with fruit. Even if it's just of that day. What's the din? Says the Gemara, we know that it's tevel. That's the vadai part. What's the suffix? The suffix meusarin. The suffix lo meusarin. We only have one suffix. We have a vadai that is tevel, and one suffix. Was this person maaser before he died? Did he tithe before he died? The kaasi suffix v'motzi midei vadai. Says the Gemara, our Mishnah says, ain suffix motzi midei vadai. What about this case? This case is a suffix of whether or not he was maaser against the vadai of tevel. We said that it's not tevel anymore, where you're allowed to eat it. Why? Ain suffix motzi midei vadai. You're not allowed. Says the Gemara, 2 possible answers. Number 1. Hasam, it's not suffix in vadai. That's easy. Hasam vadai v'vadaihu. The vadai ma'asre. If you're a chaver, you definitely are going to be ma'aser. Kid Rabbi Chanina choza. Rabbi Chanina choza chazaka al chaver she'ein motzi mitachas yado davar she'ein mesukan. As long as there was enough time for this person to give meiser, he did it. You said this case is a kasha in our Mishnah because it's suffix and vadai. This case is not suffix and vadai. It's vadai that there was tevel and vadai that he gave meiser. So no, you cannot bring a proof from here. You're asking our Mishnah. Our Mishnah is suffix and vadai. That's what's on the scale. This is not that case. This is vadai and vadai. Okay. The Meforshim point out that if God forbid he dies in an extremely tragic way, then we don't say you're allowed to eat it. There had to have been ample time. If he died of natural causes, the Meforshim point out, that's when we would rely on this, where it's vadai. But if he gets, God forbid, hit by a car while everything is going on, then no, then you're not allowed to eat the food. It needs to be tithed afterwards. That would not work. Answer number 2. We are 7 lines from the bottom. A second answer to whether or not we hold of the principle of suffix ain suffix motzi midei vadai. Says the Gemara, maybe the case of this person who was a chaver, maybe it was a suffix v'suffix who. All right, these are great ways to get out of the problem. We're asking about suffix and vadai. Maybe the case of the chaver was a suffix and suffix. How so? Dilma, there is a loophole. Dilma me'ikara amor delo tvile. Maybe it never reached the stage where it actually became tevel. How could that happen? If a person brings the food into their house while the food is still covered in its shell, this is a case where you can exempt yourself from meiser. There's a shaila, is this mutter? Is it ideal? Is it not ideal? Take a look at Rashi to see some of the details. Rashi toward the bottom, 6 lines from the bottom of the page. Dibur hamaskal kadei shetei behem to'ochelas ve'afilu keva dekol zman she'ein sham gorno shel tevel alav eino oser be'achila sarai. We don't treat this like it's gorno shel tevel, that it's the grain that is now tevel. We don't do that. This is a loophole that is built in. So maybe this case is a case of a double suffix. Suffix if it was ever tevel, and suffix of whether or not he was ma'aser. Good. So we solved the problem on that one. Says the Gemara, 3 lines from the bottom. Wait a minute, I'm going to ask again. I know you answered my last Mari Makom about the Chaver, but I have a new Mari Makom for you to contend with. Tanya, another very unfortunate scenario, similar to the one we started with today. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, there was a matzik. The last Rashi on the page writes matzik ish alama, a very strong person. V'Yisrael hava. I don't know what the context is. Shal matzik echad berimon sheitila nefel labor. And the shifcha unfortunately had a stillborn, and the baby was placed into a bore. Turning to the top of Daf Tes Amud Beis. Uva kohen beheitzitbo. A kohen is going to go stand over a mace potentially. What about the issur of becoming tamei? Kohanim are not allowed to do that. So what's happening here? How is that allowed? Well, that's kind of what we're discussing here. Uva kohen, he peers over the edge, the hitzitzbo, and looks inside the pit. Im zacharhu im nekevahi. He's checking what the gender is of the child. Why? Tumah v'tara purposes. How long does this woman have to wait? Is she waiting 7 days? Is she waiting 14? Does she bring her korban on day 40? Does she bring her korban on day 80? Does she bring neither because the child is too young? So we have to figure all these things out. And they said that this Kohen, by the way, the Kohen is not even tamei. We see that there are animals there. So says the Gemara, this proves that we do say that a suffix can trump a vadai. How so? Third line. The ahacha de vadai hitila. The case was where she said she had a stillborn, and the baby was then placed into the pit. This suffix guru, suffix lo guru haishaita. We don't know as to whether or not that animal took the mace away. We don't know. You have a suffix and you have a vadai, and we see that the suffix is motzi midei vadai v'tzi haruhu. So how does that work? So it says the Gemara, that doesn't seem to make sense. It seems like we've broken our rule. Says the Gemara, answer number one, textual problem with the Brisa. Lo tema shehitila nefel labor. Don't say that she actually put the afterbirth into the pit. Ela ema shehipila kimin nefel labor v'have suffix v'suffix. Maybe it's not a case of suffix and vadai. Maybe it's just a case of suffix and suffix. And she didn't have a proper leda. She had kimin leda. Remember we learned about this in Maseches Nida. There are different types of births. Some of them look like animals of different kinds. Are they human? Are they not? Even a whole bunch of shilas about what women could discharge in the process of having these complicated births. So this was kimin nefil. So no, that was suffix number one. We don't even know if it was an afterbirth. We have no idea if it was actually a stillborn. The have suffix the suffix. So says the Gemara, that's not possible. You can't say that that's the case because the halei daim zachar huim nekeva hiktani. But the Brisa says what the Kohen was doing. He was looking to see what the gender was. So we know that she had a stillborn of a nefel, of a human. No, this wasn't kimin, anything. We know exactly why the Kohen was there. Says the Gemara, another change in the Brisa. Hache kama. Really, it should have been Leda. What was the Kohen looking at? Leda imruach hipila, im nefel hipila. Was it just some type of sac of cells that she had given birth to? Or im nefel, that's the first thing. The im tim tzalomar nefel hipila. And had it been that it in fact taka was a real birth of a human, of a proper formed human, then leda im zachar hu im nekevahi. Answer number one. So in other words, we said we have a case of suffix and a case of vadai. Says the Gemara, no, you don't. You have a case of a double suffix, and you cannot argue against our principle of ein suffix motzi midei vadai. And now we're about 10 lines down, second answer. And if you want to say, Hasam, it's vadai v'vadaihu. There, we're talking about two vadais. And therefore, you can't argue that this case questions ein suffix motzi midei vadai. What's the vadai v'vadai? Because, says the Gemara, yes, she definitely had a leda. That's one vadai. And number two is kevan dechulda ubardlus mitzuyan sham vadai gero beishaita. There's no doubt about it that these animals would have taken whatever remnant of flesh was there. But it's true that they may not finish every last bit, which goes against what Rabbi said on the previous page. Rabbi said that all meat gets consumed. Okay, fine. But here, what do we see? What we see is that the animal, at the very least, would be removing the remnants of the human being from that space, and therefore it's vadai and vadai. We're 1/3 of the way down on Testament base. We're going to be stopping at about 15, 20 lines, give or take, 15-ish lines. We'll be stopping at the 2 dots, 2/3 of the way down. And when we get to the end there, we're going to look at the Shulchan Aruch to see how beautifully the Shulchan Aruch synthesized everything that we've learned today. Says the Gemara, going back to a question on our Mishnah, our Mishnah specifically told us on the top of the previous Amud, Ein Chosheshin Shemagir Rechulda. So the Gemara is questioning that. You said Ein Chosheshin? Really? I think we should be concerned, says the Gemara. Why should we be concerned? Because says the Gemara, you're not concerned? The next Mishnah writes, Misha Mishayer, whatever is left of the chametz, that if you leave anything that's left over, you need to put it in a box. Why do you need to hide it for? Why do you need to put it in a box? Doesn't that imply that if you leave it available to the public, that maybe an animal will take it, and then we would be choshesh? Why then does the Mishnah write bitzina? Why does the Mishnah say that you have to hide it bitzina? Why do you have to hide it? What are you concerned about? I don't understand. That doesn't make sense with our initial understanding of our Mishnah. We started our Mishnah and said, in chosheshim, we're not concerned. And then we said in the next Mishnah, you got to put it in a box. Why do you have to put it in a box? Obviously, we're concerned. Says the Gemara, answer number 1 of 3. Answer number 1. Amar Abaye, halfway down, Lokashya, habe arba asar, habe shlosha asar. Depends on the day of Nisan. Why does it depend on the day of Nisan? Because when the mice come around Bishlosha Asar, Dishchiach Rifta, Bekul Hubate, they see bread everywhere. They're looking, supply and demand. Okay, I see there's a lot of food out there. I don't need to take everything home with me now. I'll come back a little bit later and I'll take a little bit more, right? Smart rats, right? They're smart mice. So then lo mitznah. So then they're not going to take everything into hiding. But be'arba are lo shchicha rifta. But on the 14th, the mice are going to come and be like, what happened to all my food? They're going to see one piece of bread. They're going to chaparine. And then let me finish the sentence. They see the houses are almost empty from bread. Then mitzana, then mitznah. Then they're going to take the bread. So Rava says back to Abaye, first of all, Hulda was one of the female prophetesses. This is a play on words. You have to know a little bit of history. Shari Hulda is one of the gates in the base of Mikdash. Hulda was a prophetess. So this line of the Hulda Neviyahi is a little remiss to Tanakh. But he's asking here a practical question. You think these guys have like the time on their watch? Like, 14th of Nisan, they're cleaning house. Guys, everybody bring everything down to the sewers. What are you talking about? They're rats. They're mice. They don't know the difference between the 13th of Nisan and the 14th of Nisan. That's ridiculous. Therefore, he gives his own answer. Therefore, he says, let me just finish this question. Yeah, we're doing B'dikas Chametz tonight, everybody. They send out a WhatsApp message. Everyone make sure to clear house. All the mice, bring all the chametz down to the sewers. That's ridiculous. Elamar Rabbi gives his own answer. Masha Mishayer, whatever is left over, this next Mishnah, the second Mishnah that we're concerned about, the next Mishnah, whatever is left over, what we are concerned about is not in contrast with our Mishnah, but exactly the way we understood our Mishnah. What was the first thing that we said about our Mishnah today? We said an inference. That's only when the animal's not in front of us. But when the animal is in front of us, so then we have to do another B'dika. Pasha, we have to do another B'dika. So says the Gemara, Rabbi says that's exactly what's going on here. Why do we need in the next Mishnah to put the food in a box? Why do we have to hide it? Because if we see an animal take chametz, then we have to do b'dikas chametz again. That's a problem. That's why the second Mishnah says what it says. And in fact, Tanya Nami Hachi, we have a brisa that's, did I read this? Ela Amar Rava, Masha Mashari Yenichenu B'tzina, Shematito Chulda B'fanev Yitzarch B'dik Acharav. Tanya Kavase de Rava, there's a brisa that supports the Shita of Rava. Harot Telechol Chametz, Achar B'dika Ketzad Yaseh. If a person wants to eat chametz after b'dikas chametz is done, what should you do? Says the brisa supporting Rava. Masha Mishayir Yenichenu B'tzina Shelo Tavul Chulda B'sito B'fanenu. Because Rava's answer is perfectly supported. All we were concerned about is that we might see an animal actually taking food in front of us, and if that happens, our b'dika is a zero. We have to start again. A beautiful raya and a brisa to Rav. I don't even know why the Gemara continues, even though the next one's quoted on Shulchan Aruch too. But Rav had a beautiful proof. Says the Gemara, a last answer. Rav Mari Amar Gzeira Shema Yaniach Eser V'Yimatzei Teisha. What we were concerned about, and the reason why we had to put things in a box, is because Shema Yaniach Eser. Maybe you'd put out 10 pieces. Already a hint to some of the minhagim that we have. Maybe you'd put out 10 pieces V'Yimtza Teisha, and you would only find 9 of them. Therefore, we should put them all in a box, because if you know how much bread you had and you lost some, then of course you'd have to do some b'dikas chametz. Absolutely, that's true. So we're going to read the Shulchan Aruch now. You're welcome to have a sheet, or if you want, you don't have to have. I can read it out loud. But we're going to be reading the Shulchan Aruch, and as well a couple of beautiful Mishnah Brewers here. Now, as we're doing this, I just want you to. I can screen share for you guys here. I have it right here. This is the Shulchan Aruch and Siman Taf Lamed Dalet Sif Aleph. These are the dinim anogim tekef achar b'dika, the halachos that apply immediately after b'dikas chametz. Says in Sif Aleph, Shulchan Aruch writes, achar hab'dika yehei nizhar b'chametz shemishayir lahatznio. You should make sure that you hide it. Why? Whose answer does the Gemara pick? Does the Shulchan Aruch pick? Kedei shelo yitztarech b'dika acheres. That's Rava, right? That's Rava just said. We don't want to get stuck again. Kigon, shimid lenu achbar befanenu. That's Rava. Oh, the third answer that we saw, Rav Mari. Oh, im yechsar lachmo kigon sheniach eser kikaros v'imtzates. So what did the Shulchan Aruch do? He looked at our contrasting Gemaras. He saw that our Mishnah and the second Mishnah don't work. He saw that there were 3 recommended answers in the Gemara. Totally blew Abai out of the water. We don't accept that at all. He accepted answers 2 and 3 and wove them into the Shulchan Aruch. Aval bistam, what happens if nothing happened? You did your bedika, there's no mice, nothing happened. If nothing else happened, she'eno yodeh im chasim mimenu im lav, lo, there's no need to do another bedika, which is exactly the line of our Mishnah from today. Ein choshishin shema girur chulda. We don't have to worry if a mouse were to potentially, we don't have to worry about it. That's not our concern, only if it's lefanenu. And then we would have to do another bedika. Take a look at the Mishnah Berurah at the bottom, the first underlined line, achara bedika. V'hu adin b'shas bedika. Even if you're in the middle of bedika and you find some chametz, yatzniya hachametz sherot lechol. If you want to eat food for the next day, in our family we always have a table that we move out of the kitchen. We put the toaster, all the chametz goes there. We have a dedicated spot for it. You should do that. Because otherwise you should be concerned. What we should be concerned about is if you don't keep them all in one spot, then maybe and then we should be concerned. So you should try and keep everything in the same place. Now, here we're going to see another concern. If you look down just one more line where the gimel is underlined, the Mishnah Berurah here cautions us about something that some people are not careful about. Let me scroll. Sorry, guys. Forgot to scroll for you here. So here we're in the middle of Seif Katan Beis, where 4 lines from the bottom, the Mishnah Berurah, he writes, V'ha'olam ein matzniin el chametz shemotzin b'shas bedika. There are those who only are careful with the chametz that they pick up during the shas bedika. But the other chametz that they're planning on eating over the coming days, they're really not makbid about it. Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'lo shapir avdei. They're not doing the right thing. So we need to keep all of our chametz in the right place and in a protected place, because otherwise, if in fact it were to be the case that there was a chulda, you'd have to do another bedika, and there's a big machlokas that do you make a bracha, and then we pass in the kula that you don't make a bracha. This is very halacha l'maisa. Look at Sif Katan Dalet in the Shar Hatzinun, 3 lines from the bottom of the page, 2 lines from the bottom of the Shar Hatzinun. The Chai Adam writes shekasav de beofen zeh lo yo'il lo b'dikaso. Your b'dikas chametz doesn't do anything for you. Why not? Because you weren't matzniya. You didn't put your food in the right place. Animals could easily have moved it if you live in such a place. It says if you've done nothing. So we should be makbid halacha l'maisa. When we are going to be bodek for chametz, and as many months as whatever it's going to be, 4 months or so, when we do b'dikas chametz, we should make sure that all the chametz that will remain until biur needs to be cordoned off, possibly enclosed in a way that we know that no animals can get to it, because if God forbid there would be animals that could get to it, that would be a problem and would lead to the need to do another b'dikas chametz again without a bracha. We'll stop here for tonight and pick up in Yirtzeh Hashem tomorrow night with Tisha Tziburim. Have a beautiful night.